Do you know what the single most powerful educational secret hidden inside the Talmud actually is? Because I have spent 38 years working with families, and I can tell you that most parents in this country have never heard it. And yet, this one principle, this ancient practice that Jewish families have used for more than 2,000 years, may be the most important factor behind a statistic that the entire academic world still cannot fully explain. Jewish families represent 0.2% of the world's population, and yet 22% of all Nobel Prize winners in history have been Jewish. Not 2%, not 5%, 22%. I am a rabbi. I am an educator. I studied at Yeshiva University and at Teachers College at Columbia University. I have worked with children and families for nearly 4 decades, and I'm telling you that this is not a coincidence, and it is not genetics. There is a system behind it, a system of 7 Torah laws of the genius child that has been quietly operating inside Jewish homes and study halls for millennia. And today I want to share with you one of the most foundational of those 7 laws, the one that most parents, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, never think to apply in their homes. The law I'm going to share with you in this video is so powerful that when you understand it, you will never look at your child sitting alone at a desk the same way again. Stay with me until the end, because toward the final part of this teaching, I am going to share something about how this law works on the developing brain of a child that changed the way I approach education forever. This is one of the 7 Torah laws of the genius child that I have spent 38 years studying, and it begins with a practice that is 2,000 years old. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, the son and grandson of educators. My grandfather, Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, taught in Brooklyn for 47 years. He taught 3 generations of families. I would sit beside him in the evenings sometimes, watching him prepare his lessons, watching him think. And one of the things I noticed from the time I was very young was that he never studied alone. He always had a partner, a friend, a fellow scholar. Even in his 60s, even in his 70s, he would call someone and say, "Come, let us look at this passage together." I did not understand why at the time. I thought it was just a social habit, a way for old men who loved learning to spend time together. It was only years later, after I had studied in Jerusalem for 11 years, after I had trained formally in psychology of education, after I had sat with hundreds of families in New York and New Jersey and Florida and California, that I understood my grandfather was not just being social. He was practicing a principle so deeply embedded in Jewish tradition that it has its own name, a name I will share with you in a moment. And my grandfather used to say to me, "Aaron, the mind that meets another mind becomes twice the mind it was." I was 12 years old when he first said that to me, and I smiled and nodded politely. I had no idea he was summarizing over 2,000 years of Jewish educational philosophy in one sentence. Before I continue, I want to ask something of you. If this teaching is already connecting with something you feel about your child's education, write the word light in the comments right now. Just that one word. You will understand why I ask that as we go deeper into this teaching. Here is what I see every single week. Parents who are worried, parents who are doing everything right on the surface. They are buying the workbooks. They are enrolling their children in tutoring programs. They are sitting beside their children at the kitchen table, supervising homework for hours. And yet something is not clicking. The child is not retaining information the way the parent hoped. The child is not developing the kind of deep, flexible, creative intelligence that you know is in there somewhere. Because you can see it. You can see it in the questions your child asks. You can see it in the way they think when they are playing, when they are curious, when they are not being tested. And then the school sends home a report. And none of that potential is reflected on that paper. And you feel a kind of grief that is difficult to name. I know that feeling. I have sat across from hundreds of parents who carry it. And here is what I have come to understand after 38 years. The conventional educational system is built on a model of isolated learning. Child sits at desk. Child listens to teacher. Child goes home. Child sits alone. Child completes worksheet. Child is tested in isolation. And this model, however widespread it may be, is fundamentally at odds with how the human brain actually develops deep understanding. Let me give you 3 things the conventional system tells parents to do that do not work the way we think they do. The first is repetition without reflection. We tell children to read a passage 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And yet research on memory consolidation, including the work that came out of cognitive psychology in the past 2 decades, shows us that passive rereading is one of the least effective methods of retaining complex information. The second is solo homework time. We treat it as a virtue. The child goes to their room, the door closes, and silence is supposed to mean learning is happening. But silence is often the sound of a mind circling the same confusion, without any way out. And the third is evaluation through tests rather than through articulation. We measure what a child has learned by asking them to fill in blanks or circle answers on a page. But the Talmud has known for 2,000 years what modern research is now beginning to confirm. The deepest proof of understanding is the ability to explain something to another person. A 2018 study published in the journal Contemporary Educational Psychology confirmed that students who explain material to peers during study sessions retain significantly more than students who study the same material alone. The Talmud knew this, not as a research finding, as a sacred principle of how human minds are meant to encounter knowledge. There are 7 Torah laws of the genius child in total. Most parents never learn even one. What I am about to share with you is one of the most foundational. It is not a study trick. It is not a hack. It is a law. And it has been producing exceptional minds for 2,000 years. The practice I want to share with you today comes from one of the most central pillars of the Jewish study tradition. It is called shavruta. The word comes from the Aramaic root shaver, which means friend, companion, or partner. In the most traditional Jewish academies of learning, in every yeshiva from Jerusalem to Brooklyn to Vilna, students have never studied alone. Not for 2,000 years. They have always studied in pairs. 2 students, 1 text. And instead of reading quietly, they argue, they question, they challenge each other's understanding. They say, wait, I think you misread that. And the other says, no, look again. It says this. And back and forth they go, not in anger, but in the spirit of what the tradition calls machloket l'shem shamayim, a debate conducted for the sake of heaven, for the sake of truth. In Traktat Tanit of the Babylonian Talmud, there is a teaching that draws directly on the verse from Proverbs chapter 27. Iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens the face of another. This is not a metaphor about aggression. It is a description of what happens when 2 minds press against each other in the pursuit of understanding. They sharpen each other. They reveal to each other the dull edges in their own thinking. And in that friction, something brilliant is produced. Maimonides, the great Rambam, codified in his Mishneh Torah, in the section known as Hilchot Talmud Torah, the laws of Torah study, the ideal conditions for genuine learning, and social engagement, study and relationship, is woven through his entire framework. Pirkei Avot, The Ethics of the Fathers, in chapter 1, verse 6, contains the teaching of Yehoshua ben Perechiah. Make for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion. The rabbis did not say acquire a textbook. They did not say acquire a tutor. They said acquire a companion. Today I am sharing with you law number 3 of the 7 Torah laws of the genius child, the law of Chavruta. The law that says your child's genius does not emerge in isolation. It emerges in encounter. I want to walk you carefully through what this law actually looks like when it is applied in a home, and why it works the way it does at the level of the developing mind. First, understand what Chavruta is not. It is not your child doing homework while a sibling sits nearby doing their own homework. That is proximity. That is not partnership. And it is not a parent explaining to a child while the child listens. That is instruction. That is not Chavruta either. Chavruta is 2 people of roughly equal standing, equal investment, encountering the same material together with the explicit goal of building understanding between them, not receiving it from above. The first thing that Chavruta does, that solo study cannot do, is it forces externalization. When your child sits alone and reads a chapter of history or a page of mathematics, they can maintain the comfortable illusion that they understand it. The mind is a remarkably skilled self-deceiver. We read something, we nod, we move on, and we tell ourselves we have absorbed it. But the moment another person is in the room, the moment that person says to your child, "Okay, explain it to me," the illusion collapses. And that collapse, uncomfortable as it is the beginning of real learning. The ancient rabbis understood this. In Tractat Berakot 63b of the Babylonian Talmud, there is a passage that says, Torah is only truly acquired through fellowship, not through reading, not through listening, through fellowship. The second thing Chavruta does is it creates what the psychologist Lev Vygotsky identified in the 20th century as the zone of proximal development. This is the space between what a child can understand alone and what they can understand with the support of a peer. Vygotsky's research showed that children consistently reach higher levels of comprehension when working with another child than when working in isolation. He discovered this through observation. The Talmud prescribed it through revelation. The third thing Chavruta does is it transforms the emotional relationship to not knowing. In a traditional classroom, not knowing is a source of shame. You raise your hand with the wrong answer and you feel exposed. But in Chavruta, not knowing is the starting point. You say, "I do not understand this line." And your partner says, "Neither do I. Let us figure it out together." And in that moment of shared not knowing, something remarkable happens. The mind relaxes, the defenses lower, and the real work of thinking begins. This is why so many of the families I have worked with over the past 38 years have seen dramatic shifts in their children's academic performance, not when they increased solo study time, but when they restructured how their children encountered material. When 2 children sit together and argue about what a paragraph means, they are not wasting time. They are practicing the oldest and most effective method of knowledge acquisition that humanity has ever developed. This law becomes 10 times more powerful when combined with the other laws of the system, because Chavruta alone is extraordinary. But when it operates inside a home where all 7 Torah laws of the genius child are active, the results are of a different order entirely. The 22% Nobel statistic is not produced by one law. It is produced by a system. And what you are receiving today is law number 3 of that system. There are 7 of these laws in total. Most parents never learn even one. Now you have one that you can begin applying this week. But I want to give you something else before we close. Because the how of Chavruta in a home setting has specific conditions that determine whether it works or whether it becomes a distraction. And I must be honest with you, the complete framework for creating Chavruta environments in a modern household, including how to choose the right partner for your child, how to structure the sessions so that they produce genuine cognitive depth rather than social chat, and how to integrate Chavruta with the other 6 laws of the system. That is not something I can fully give you in a single video. What I can tell you is that the first step is this. Your child should never be the only one responsible for explaining the material. The goal is not for one child to teach and the other to listen. The goal is for both children to become confused together, to argue together, and to arrive at understanding together. That is where the genius is forged. I will confess something to you. There was a period in my life when my children were young and I was building my practice and traveling frequently between New York and California, when I allowed our home to slip away from these principles. My children were in good schools. They were doing their homework. They were getting acceptable grades. And I told myself that was enough. It was not enough. Because acceptable grades is not the goal. The goal is a mind that has learned how to learn, a neshama, a soul, that has been taught that knowledge is not a destination but a conversation. It was only when I returned deliberately to these 7 laws, when I restructured how my own household approached study and dialogue and intellectual partnership, that I saw the difference. The difference was not in grades. It was in the quality of questions my children began to ask. And right now, there is something happening in the broader educational landscape that makes this more urgent than ever. A 2023 report from the National Assessment of Educational Progress in the United States showed that reading and mathematics scores among school-age children continued to decline following years of disruption. More screen time, more passive consumption, more isolated learning, less dialogue, less debate, less of exactly what Chavruta provides. The crisis in children's intellectual development is not for lack of information. Children have access to more information than any generation in human history. The crisis is for lack of encounter, for lack of the friction that sharpens iron into iron. My grandfather spent 47 years teaching in Brooklyn. He never had a whiteboard or a projector or an app. What he had was a pair of students sitting across from each other with one text between them, and they produced minds that changed the world. What I want you to leave with today is not just an idea. I want you to leave with a shift in how you see your child's learning. The first thing I want you to remember is this. Your child's intelligence is not a private resource to be developed in private. It is a living thing that grows in contact with other minds. Isolation does not develop genius. Encounter does. The second thing I want you to remember is that when your child struggles to explain something to a partner, they are not failing. They are discovering the exact edge where real learning happens. That moment of confusion, that pause, that I thought I understood it, that is the most valuable moment in any study session. Do not rush past it. That is where the growth is. The third thing I want you to remember is that this is not a parenting tip. This is law number 3 of the 7 Torah laws of the genius child. A law that has been producing exceptional thinkers for over 2,000 years. And now you carry it with you. Use this knowledge with intention and with love. In my next teaching, I will reveal another of the 7 laws, one that connects directly to what you just learned. Because Chavruta does not operate alone. There is another practice that must always accompany it, a law about what happens before the learning begins, in the hours and the silence before a child sits down to study. I will share it with you soon. If this teaching meant something to you, I ask one thing. Share this video with one parent who needs to hear it. Not 5, just 1. You know who that person is. Subscribe to this channel and activate the bell so that when the next teaching arrives, you receive it. And write in the comments, what was the one thing in this video that shifted something in how you see your child's learning? I read every comment, every single one. Because for me, this is not content. This is the work of 4 decades, and every family that receives it is the reason I do it. Raise them with wisdom. Shalom.